So Giles, welcome back to Oxford.
Thank you very much.
My first question for you, it's a bit of a personal one, but did you ever come to the union when you were at Oxford?
I came to join. I think it was 60 quid for lifetime membership. Is it still, do you still pay for it? Yeah. 60 quid for lifetime membership. Still got the card, which I actually sent you in an email, which it seemed like good value for a lifetime, but I never came back until today. I played snooker in the union, played in the union snooker competition. They reeled us in with the first debate, 1988 this was. I went with Ayat's dad, my friend Robin Yassin Kassab, and we went to see Bassam Abu Sharif, who people don't talk about much anymore, who was Yasser Arafat's number 2, which was quite a big deal. I think we were between intifadas then, but anyway, it was a big thing. Bassam Abu Sharif came huge, was amazing, came along, right, joining that, 60 quid. For the rest of my time here, it was just Stephen Fry every week. And so I sort of faded in interest. But it's nice to be back now. Is the snooker table still here?
Yes, we've still got the snooker table. Might be going soon, but hopefully not.
Why?
I don't know, there's some talk about getting rid of it and replacing with an extension of the bar or something like that.
With the next, you've got to have snooker tables. You've got a bar. You've got to have snooker tables. There were 2. That was what people joined for. I made the semi-final of the 1989 Union snooker competition. It's still on my CV. It's like my major sporting achievement. No blues for snooker in those days.
Other than snooker, how do you find your time at Oxford?
I can only tell when I never quite know, but certainly walking here from the station, I felt a bit sick. And sort of afraid. I don't know why. I think that I hadn't really been back in the 30 years since, and I felt all sort of nervous, and I felt sad. I kept expecting my friends to walk round a corner, all kind of hairless but with hair on their heads and squeaky faced and happy and alive, and they weren't. They were these other people, and I don't know. I was looking at them, wondering if they were happy, and it was so complicated being at Oxford and arriving here. And am I going to make friends or not make friends? Am I going to be able to do much? Should I worry more about doing my work or making friends or what's it? Before I came here, I thought it was going to be like, there was a thing, Brideshead Revisited was this series that was on in the 80s with they all wore Aran jumpers and long scarves and carried teddy bears. And I sort of thought it was going to be like that. And I'd started having nostalgia for my time at Oxford before I'd even got here, because it was all going to be like Sebastian Flight and an Evelyn Waugh thing. And then I got here and it was a lot grungier than that. But I don't know. It's tricky. You have to try and hold on to the happy memories. But there were some miserable ones, split-ups of relationships that I just thought I would never recover from, and in some ways didn't. And all that stress. I still dream about finals, and I did my finals in '91, and I did fine, and I have this dream, and I probably have it whenever I'm probably 6 times a year in times of anxiety, and the dream's always the same. I'm always back at Oxford, and I'm 51, and my finals are coming up in a week, and I'm doing English. Okay, and the thing was, I did English the first time. So why am I doing another English degree? I've already got an English degree. I don't need why didn't I at least do history? And I don't know what any of the subjects are going to be. And I try to take solace from the fact that in this dream, because what happened was that I sort of, with the aforementioned sort of tragic love affairs, which were just nothing really, but I sort of admit my second year I didn't really partake very much. And in the third year I was all very behind. And it got to 2 months from schools and I hadn't done any work. And so I broke down the papers that I had, 9 papers with 3 essays in each one, so 27 essays, 27 topics, found 27 writers, read their shortest thing, got them all together, got into the exam, got very lucky with the questions, got a first, boom, done, triumph. Why am I still dreaming about it 30 years later? Why am I having to do it again? The point, I can just imagine all the kids having all of the anxieties about finals, which I think must be going on now, unless kids are just covering themselves in shaving foam and dressing as elves for fun on the high street. And you go through all of that, you think, yes, I've done it, I've got a photo, which I really, because my dad was here 30 years before me at Wadham, which I didn't get into. So I went to Keble, and I used to walk past Wadham every day, just feeling rejected. And he got the first, so I had to do what he'd done and get what he'd done. And I did it, and he was really pleased. And still I have this nightmare. And I wish in my dreams I'd done maths or something, so I could do a different subject the second time. Anyway, yeah, that's complicated. Yeah.
No, very fair. Leaving Oxford then, do you feel like you, going straight into journalism, how do you find that? Do you find that
I didn't go straight into journalism.
Okay.
So it doesn't make it onto Wikipedia what happened in between.
Yes.
No, it's fine. No, I didn't. I don't want to interrupt your question, but I left in 91 with this aforementioned first. And my best friend Robin, whose daughter's there, who's at Keble now, she went to Keble. I don't know why. We had a terrible time at Keble, but anyway, and Robin and I, but we both got first, and we just couldn't get jobs, couldn't get work at all, and there was a recession, and I couldn't even get my old bar job back that I'd had before. Whereas now I gather that everyone who can get a bar job, they're all over the place. There's a shortage of bar staff, so you'll be fine after you've been president of the union. So I went to live in Paris and worked in a clothes shop, and Robin came and slept on the floor, my mate from Keble, and we sat there with our first going, what's this all about then? Well, and for about 2 years, just worked in clothes shops and bars and stuff. Just so that you know, I really thought I was working at a bar in Hampstead when I got the result, and I phoned up to say, what have I got? Spoke to my tutor, and he said, you've got a first. Yeah, came downstairs with to the bar and waving a piece of paper up, going, this is my license to print money. Went around telling everyone. I got 2 years later, I'm coming back trying to get the job back, and they're going, how's your license to print money? It didn't go very well. And then I went into journalism afterwards.
Okay, so my next question kind of seems a bit silly now, but then going to journalism, did you feel like you were kind of trapped by the same or surrounded by the same sort of people that you were at Oxford? How did you find
Yes, there was a problem at the Times, was that I hadn't been to Magdalen, so they would very much look down on me. I was what passed for diversity on Fleet Street in 1991. Someone from Keble, up South Parks Road, he's one of them. It wasn't I sort of failed into journalism. Not failed, but I couldn't get other jobs. And I used to, I don't know whether the Guardian media section is still on a Monday, but there were these jobs and I'd apply and send my CV and no replies. And I got some work experience at the Times for a week because my dad was a columnist for the Times, so he was able to phone someone. So, in all the sort of derailment of privilege, my entire life is just an exemplum of what everybody's trying to change. In that, I just went to public school and then I came here because my dad came here. I didn't get into Wadham. Wadham was run by, the head of English was a guy called Terry Eagleton, who I hope is long forgotten and nobody remembers, who was a big Marxist critic. He didn't like me at all, quite rightly. I was an awful wanker. So he sent me on to Keble. And then I left, and then I went and got a job at the Times where my dad had worked, and everybody was public school, white, Oxbridge. But literally, there was the Magdalen Mafia, and there was a glass ceiling on Fleet Street at the Times in the 90s, like Magdalen, literally. If you wanted to be editor, no, Keble man, you can do sport or something.
So how did you get into food writing and restaurant writing?
I didn't. I've only ever just I've had a very sort of passive approach to life. I've only really ever done what's come along, just whatever's been put in front of me. So in journalism, there was just lots of food writing. Food got kind of big in the mid-late 90s. Gordon Ramsay got famous, Nigella, Jamie Oliver, stuff like that. And people started writing about it. And I had lived in France, and they Giles, he's lived in France. He knows about fromage, don't you, Giles? Somebody, I suppose so. So I then would write bits and bobs about food, and it wasn't a thing. People now often ask, how did you get into food? Well, to be a restaurant critic. That wasn't anything in the 90s. Nobody wanted to write about food. It wasn't an important thing. Nobody really cared. Now it's all there is. It's all newspapers are. It's all that's on the TV. It's the same. I'm sure somewhere down your list it'll be getting how I got into TV, because I knew about food, and I wasn't 48 stone, so you could fit me onto a TV screen, and I knew a bit about food, which is all anybody ever wanted to put on the TV. I was going to be a literary critic, was my plan. I wrote book reviews, terrible book reviews, and then I realised that with food you only have to eat the meal. Book review, review the Vikram Seth. I was Vikram Seth very early on. The Suitable Boy, 1,000 pages. A review of that by Wednesday. Immediately had my Oxford dream. And so then just got into food because it's easier.
So you talk about everything. Everything today is about food. Food kind of surrounds us. TikTok, Instagram, everything. How do you make your reviews, your writing, your columns still relevant today?
Do you think I do?
You're still popular.
Am I? I still have a job. I don't know. I think probably because I don't really write about food so much. I write 1,000 words of sort of wibble, which has become the thing that people expect from me, that I write 1,000 words about something, my life or politics or whatever, and then it segues into the food. It's often because I go out and have a really good meal, because I have to make it into my life. I don't make notes or anything. I go and have a lovely meal, as we're having later. Well, it might not be lovely, who knows? But and I don't really know anything. And I used to often get drunk. That's what does in restaurants because there's wine and Rupert Murdoch's paying for it, so you keep sloshing it. And I often couldn't remember much about it in the morning. So I would write these 1,000 words about something else and then go, and then we had some pork belly, it was delicious. And then go, Giles, with his unique style of not really writing about the food, just because I couldn't remember anything. So now, even when I can remember about the food, I tend to not put it in because I'm suspicious about how interested people really are in it. There's a funny enough, the Guardian. My friend Marina O'Loughlin, who was the Guardian critic, and she's now, I got her over to the Sunday Times, and Grace Dent does it now, she's great, and Jay Rayner, who I don't like so much. They have a thing, because of the nature of the Guardian and the Observer, to be a bit more, they believe it to be more accessible, to be, whatever it is the Guardian thinks it is, they have to go to restaurants, they have to go to these, they go to other restaurants. The food becomes very important, and they end up going, they go to cheaper restaurants because they don't want to look elitist. Whereas I think that you're going to the restaurant for the readers. So I go to some very expensive restaurant and then tell the readers, don't worry, it's rubbish. And then they don't feel they're missing out on anything. They don't want to be told there's a greasy spoon up the road from you where you can eat for £3 and you won't be sick. So, yeah, that.
So how do you spot a good restaurant then?
With what, just from sort of walking past?
If I want to look for a good restaurant in Oxford or in Cambridge or wherever.
Yeah, Oxford and Cambridge is good. Look, they're good places for universities, Oxford and Cambridge. Less for food. I mean, Oxford is not too bad, and there are. So I've reviewed some things here that are quite good, but most of them are in London. Not only, and it's changed a lot, but in terms of depending on the kind of food you're after. Where there's disposable cash, there are restaurants that people can afford to make mistakes in because you can have a restaurant that does this exciting thing. For example, there's been a big boom in regional Chinese food. Once upon a time in England, you used to talk about Chinese food, which is obviously more ridiculous than talking about European food. There's more different cuisines in China than there are in Europe, and it's like going. But you couldn't really have a Sichuan restaurant, particularly, or a Hunanese restaurant, because there weren't enough things on the menu that people could recognise and order, and that's still the case in small towns. But in London, you can have a restaurant which is just specialities of Dong Bai or whatever, and that can everyone go, that's great. There's millions of people who want to go there, and then you go. So, like particularly for Chinese food, I found Nottingham's wonderful because both the universities there have lots of Chinese students. Did have until COVID. Who with disposable income, interest in food, and then you get loads of Chinese restaurants which are really, really good, and it's much better there than it is in Manchester or something like that. But it's quite difficult. You avoid TripAdvisor probably because whenever I arrive in a town, and like you arrive in Leicester and you Google best restaurant in Leicester, I can't even look what it's going to say, but it's always the cheapest thing, which doesn't necessarily mean the best value. So I probably have some other tips, but we'll find out if it works later on tonight. How did you choose tonight's restaurant, by the way? Or who did?
Amber did.
Did Amber do it? Or was it that bloke who was sacked for incompetence? I'm really worried that there's this bloke who had some job at the union and he was fired for incompetence not long after contacting me to ask if I would come and speak. And I feel personally responsible that it might have been me. And then also I'm slightly worried if he was responsible for this restaurant.
No. I think it was Amber, so you can blame Amber.
Okay.
So my next question is, why do you think people are interested in your everyday, your podcast, your columns?
Oh, I don't. I don't know. I have no idea. I have no idea. On social media, all I can ever see is people going, why does he think anyone would be interested in his life? And it's not very many. I mean, there's lots and lots of people who like it, and the podcast does really well, not like sort of Joe Rogan or Peter Crouch, but it's sort of, given the many million, it was number one for a while in the podcast charts, although they skew for new stuff. But we're usually in and around the top 100, which, considering there are, at last count, 40 billion podcasts, is quite good. And I don't know, but when people tweet, why does it you think anybody cares about this crap? I think, I don't know. Good point. I don't know. I think the podcast, which is my wife's idea, I think people quite like, and you're too young, most of you, to care, quite like seeing a marriage basically falling to pieces before your eyes. But we don't say that's what the podcast is about. We say it's about going through the paper, looking for something for me to write about. But we do have a kind of row, usually, some sort of therapy. My wife will, usually she goes, yeah, you're quite right. Usually she agrees with me and everything's fine. She wants to quiet down. As soon as the podcast microphone goes on, my wife tells me exactly what she thinks of me. And people seem to like that. I think also contained within it is is a sort of internal reader in the thing. So my reputation for being sort of irascible and dogmatic and opinionated, which I'm not really, but I just am for a living, it's underscored by her saying, "Shut up, you said that before, you've only got 3 jokes." And I go, "Yeah, that's true." Her favourite, Esther's favourite line on the last podcast was saying, how she was talking about how I do my restaurant reviews, and generally speaking, I got drunk, and then in the morning I'll like shout across to her study and go, "Have you got any photos of what we eat? Was it any good? And did I say anything funny that I can put in the review?" And she would go, "I haven't got photos. Yes, it was all right. No, you didn't." And that's the general pattern.
So you talk about how you kind of like, do you think you put a personality on in your writing or in your TV interviews, in your media presence? You talk about anger, your book about like your angry side. How much of it do you think is...
The anger, it's hard, isn't it? I'd always rather be asleep than doing anything. And it's like, even talking here, for example, I mean, it's kind of, there's not, it's not that many people, but you're all wearing masks, which is quite scary. I feel like it's one of those 19th century operations, when they have the first ever heart surgeon. It's an audience, and I'm about to be operated on, and everyone's got masks on. You have to make something there for there to be a personality, for there to be something worth filming, or something worth recording, or something to write about. And particularly with the TV, which is a thing that my wife says about me and I accept, which is that you have to be a psychopath. At a certain level, have to be a psychopath. And it's why so many of them end so badly, and why you get little psychopath things like the Jeremy Clarkson when he was fired from Top Gear for kicking off about being bought a cheese platter because he wanted a steak, and he went mental and punched the producer. And I was wheeled out onto Radio 4 to explain why I can understand why he punched the producer, which wasn't great going forward for my career. But I could because if you are in this job where everyone's looking at you, and it's not even actual. There aren't even actual real people looking at you. There's just a camera, and they turn it on. They say, "Right, go," and you've just got to talk. That's weird situation to be in. You just normally go, "No, I don't want to say anything. I've got nothing to say." So you go, "No, actually, here we find ourselves at the thing," and to be able to switch it on, and God knows I don't switch it on like Keith Richards, but I don't switch it on like Jimmy Carr. I don't have and the ones with the massive, like Elvis, they end up dead on the toilet. Michael Jackson. If you're a really big performer, so at the lower levels, you have to have find some bit of your personality that you magnify. And then that can lead to you looking like a bit of an arsehole. And I mean, I was for a couple of years just a literary critic. Not a literary critic, I was a book reviewer in the papers. And I would just 500 words. And the first sentence I wrote in journalism was a review of a posthumous collection by Italo Calvino. "This is a little something left to us after the feast, when Italo Calvino departed this life." And that was like, my career went like that for I would always write by turns, depressing and comical. So because that's the kind of phrases that get onto the dust jackets. And my best achievement was to get like my name onto the back of a Penguin book of an unknown writer. And then in order to become something a bit more that people remember and pay for, and sort of, you have to exaggerate it a bit. But then particularly now, things are, the internet was sold to us as this place that was, in the 90s, as transient, ephemeral, do stuff on the internet, so when it goes away, but it doesn't. The thing that turns out, it's always there, and it never goes away, as that cricketer who did these racist, sexist tweets, Ollie Robinson, a couple of days ago when he was a teenager. He's in a lot of trouble because it doesn't go away. And if you're a writer and you express yourself day after day after day for a year, it's all there, and there's nothing terrible in mind, but there's obvious sort of arseholery as I'm trying to build a personality, which can always be dragged back and thrown in your face.
How do you kind of cope with that? You've spoken a bit about therapy and psychoanalysis. What's your experience of it? Do you recommend it? Do you think it's a necessary part of being in public life?
No, not necessarily. I did psychoanalysis for 10 years, 4 days a week. For a while, 5 days every day. I don't really know why. I was just sort of, I know why, because I was, funnily enough, it was a row outside Wadham, but I was 40 or 38, 37. And I had a girlfriend my dad had been diagnosed with terminal lung cancer and had about 6 weeks to live. And I happened to be in a relationship that was a little bit toxic. with a girl whose parents were both academics here, and we'd been to a thing, I can't remember what, and we were walking down South Park Road having a row about something. I can't remember what row. And when I used to argue, I used to be quite violent, never ever violent to a person, but I would look around for something to smack, like, my 30th birthday, my mum said something that annoyed me so much that I punched this table in a Chinese restaurant until I broke about 3 fingers. And when I went, and she then took me to the hospital. I'll drive you to hospital, darling, okay. And I got there, and literally in casualty, they went, "Oh, Giles, nice, is it the hand again?" And they were like X-rays, and so I used to have major anger problems, and sort of they were self-harm isn't the word, but I would be violent to walls and tables in order to cause myself pain for reasons if you've got 4 days a week for the next 10 years, I'll tell you. But I had this row with this girlfriend, Rachel, and funnily enough, we were walking back past Wadham, which is always a bit triggering for me, and because she didn't want me, my dad was dying, Wadham didn't want me, and I parked. I don't know if you still can. I parked in that little bay outside Wadham. I don't know if you still. The thing I haven't told you about when I was undergraduate here, I had a car. I never got around to getting a bike. I had a car that I just parked out on South Park Road outside Keble. I used to drive to lectures at the English faculty. I used to drive. My girlfriend was at Univ. I used to drive down Turl Street. You just could. Yeah, it was. Not everyone did, but you could. But anyway, so I had this is later when I'm like 38, outside Wadham, having a row. Came to my car, and I was so angry that I kicked the wing mirror off it. I went bam, sort of rugby kick, kind of boom, kicked the wing mirror off, and it flew into the road, landed on the windscreen of a car that was going past, swerved, got out. What's going on? Nothing. Just a small row with my girlfriend. And whose car have you kicked? Well, that's my car. I have a tendency to do this. And then this girl, Rachel, said, "You need help." And she was like about the 7th girlfriend. And I thought, "No, I don't." And I thought, "Oh yeah, maybe I do. Maybe you're right." So then I went and got help. First, I wrote a book called Anger Management for Beginners and got a nice advance. So because I needed to be angry just to get the book done. And then I went and had the analysis. And yes, I think if you have major problems and can afford it, it's the best thing. And on the NHS, they can only prescribe CBT because it's a cognitive behavioural therapy, and which is a 6-session thing, which can address and does address very well particular sort of anxiety, depression things. But if you're a big, important artistic person, you need something much flashier. Ideally, mostly in German, in Hampstead, where I had it on a couch.
My final question is, before we open up to the audience, is about veganism.
Yes.
We have a debate on Thursday. This house believes...
You are having or have had?
We are having. Yeah.
This isn't the one with Greta and Malala?
No.
Very exciting.
No, that'd be quite mean. No, this is on
Yes, it would be unfair to get them on and then say it's about veganism.
Yeah.
They think we've come all this way. Yeah, anyway, go on. Yes, veganism.
What do you think about it? What do you think about the movement? I know you've been critical of it in the past in some of your writing.
Long way past.
Yeah.
There's an example of the internet doesn't go away. Although I don't really mind. I used to be mean about vegans. It's sort of, it sounds really weird now. I'm mean about people who like cheese or something. I mean, it's really weird. But vegetarianism, people didn't used to be vegan much in Britain. They tended to be vegetarian, and then veganism was just a little bit more vegetarian. It was mostly motivated by animal welfare. But when I was at Oxford, there were people who were vegetarians, but there were small numbers. I started being a restaurant critic, and I know what a twattish position it was because Gordon Ramsay still has it. If anything that he thinks now, even though I thought it 10, 15 years ago, I think it's also useful that I felt strongly about it. I would say mean things about how they fart a lot and just not very funny stuff. Oh, the food all smells of aubergine, yuck, and they fart all the time, and they're not very strong. And so, there's nothing to be... But it's because I realised that I felt threatened. So I now promote veganism quite a lot without being fully a vegan. Without being at all a vegan. But I say that it's good. So I used to defend smoking. I used to think smoking was great. And I used to be one of those idiots who's endlessly, defending one's right to smoke. And I used to smoke in offices, and I used to smoke when I was here and everything. And now I'm on the not smoking side. But with veganism, I now see when people get so angry with me, and they still, if you write, there was a phase with foie gras, which I can't really believe anyone eats anymore, where I would have disagreed with all the animal rights people who said you shouldn't force feed geese. And I said, no, they love it. They love it being force fed. They get lots of, they're very happy and fat geese, marvelous, delicious. And I don't know why, but and people would be so furious with me, the people who, and it was always that sort of militant vegans would always be very, very violent. They would always wish death, vile things upon you. And you go, whoa, coming from a vegan, that's quite, But in fact, their opinion, as radical opinions sometimes do, changed my opinion over time. And but I now see that when I write about veganism, and say, I did a couple of weeks ago, and say, I accept we should all be vegans. And I wrote a thing the other week saying, we have to it has to be small steps. There's no reason when eating a hamburger ever, and nothing has to have lived or died for that. You mostly eat a hamburger, whether it's a crappy McDonald's thing or a product. You're eating it mostly for the buns and the mayo and the lettuce. Nothing. You make a decent bean burger or an insect burger or any of those things, and you can't tell it's not beef, and it doesn't matter. That's what you should eat. And then I get very extreme. We should just ban it now, because there was that Extinction Rebellion people, that sort of wing of them, who said McDonald's should go vegan by 2025. And I went, no, 2023, bring it forward. I then put brackets, I've got an electric car, so I'm a bit like Jesus. And I think it's very important. And then people are very, very threatened and write me really horrible letters to carnivores, because people feel that, as I remember, their way of life threatened by the notion that everyone's going vegan. They see it as like the same. They feel threatened by what they sort of lazily term woke culture, and they'll put anything into it that they don't like. And veganism is, that's what these woke people eat, vegetables. They're attacking my way of life. I love a lovely pork chop. They go, and they think it's a very important thing. I now see my job in my position where, for example, not much point saying that the Guardian food pages, you should be vegetarian, you should be vegan, because they mostly already are. But the Times ones, the right of centre press, the old Tufton Buftons, my constituency are like the ones who are still alive, are sort of home count. A lot of them are sort of home counties, old people. My young constituency comes from TV and podcasts and stuff, but the readers are mostly old. And I think if I tell them enough, I'm allowed to have the odd chicken leg, as long as I'm converting enough people to become vegans, I also read a very persuasive book by Jonathan Safran Foer called something like Saving the Planet Begins at Breakfast, which was proposing that everyone should be vegan till 6 p.m. every day. And I did that for about a year. And he, on the basis of, because now it's more of an environmental movement really than an animal welfare thing, on the basis that in fact if the whole world went vegan till 6 p.m, it would have more impact from a climate point of view than if everyone went vegetarian, because you've got to cut out the dairy and everything as well. And also on the basis that it's very hard to tell people you could never have a steak again. But if you say you've got to wait till 6 o'clock, people have 2 meals a day that are vegan. I did that for about 2 years and still sort of broadly do. In fact, I've done it today. I have had only lettuce, bananas and apples today. But I'm quite hungry, and that's because I was on the train at lunchtime.
You talk a bit about woke culture and kind of diversifying your audience. Do you see it as your responsibility to make people want to kind of diversify their opinion and expose them to new things? Do you think it's really possible to do that when your audience or journalism or the people who write the Times are just posh white people rather than a diverse group of people? Do you think we need actual diversity in journalism in order to do that, or do you think the people within it can do it themselves?
You mean, do you think I can make everything all right for young people of colour by just simply writing things? No.
Do you think we need to get more people in, or do you think you can change it yourself? And do you think there's a responsibility in yourself and other journalists?
Me personally, there is an argument where during last summer, and you want to talk about something as something as important as that as having a sort of spike and becoming less important, because it didn't. It's an ongoing thing. But obviously, the BLM thing, there was a spike of debate in the mainstream press last summer. There was an argument that the best thing I could do, it's a bit like the climate argument, that what we have is too many people. So the best thing you can do for the climate is die as a human. In the same way, the best thing that I could have done for diversity, the best thing I could do for diversity would be to stop working. Because whatever I write, there is an argument in which I'm a blocker on, how are you going to bring young people through and different kinds of people through if there's someone like me there. And I think, the other ones can retire and I will stay here for a bit more. But there's absolutely a huge amount of work that needs to be done. And particularly, the press is a particularly good example of where it does. And the Times needs to be. The Times radio, you can, things like internships, I was talking earlier, there is that pattern in the media where you can do unpaid work if you come from a secure, urban, basically a London wealthy background. It's a class rather than a cultural, ethnic thing there. But I don't know, it's hard because a lot of these ideas are difficult for older people like me. the speed of change that young people feel is needed is threatening. And there is a thing, I work for a newspaper group that employs people who, are, like Rod Liddle and Jeremy Clarkson, who take up the baton in defense of middle-aged, well-off white people, because they feel that, which is a section which, although I am one of, I don't think needs my help. And certainly I wouldn't want to have anything to do with, and it's difficult if you're ranty and if you are middle-aged and white and if you write columns which essentially seem to be protecting your self-interest, then they can go, Coren, Littlejohn, Clarkson, you're the same as them. Someone like Rich Littlejohn in the Daily Mail, who has been for 30 years saying, white working class men are the real embattled minority, I'm standing up for them, which he can only do by being racist and sexist and homophobic. It's terrifying. But it's a very difficult question. And I don't know, what do you think? That's what you do. You ask young people what they think. I just remembered. What do you think?
No. I do think that probably needs to change the sort of people involved. Get more people in, get more accessible internships, things like that. Like you said, it does strike me quite odd. I think everyone at Oxford right now, everyone in my at least, is looking to apply for these banking, consulting, law internships, and they all seem to advertise themselves and come and ask for things. But all my friends who want to go into journalism just kind of seem a bit stuck.
We have nothing to offer. Yeah. Banks have a starting salary of God knows what. It was 20 grand when I was a kid, and that sounded a lot. It's going to be 100 grand you start on with Credit Suisse or something. Journalism, you come out where you start on about 15, but there's a canteen and a smoking area. It's not a very big sell. We're a dying industry with declining circulation, no advertising. One of the things it's important to get young people from all sorts of different backgrounds into journalism quickly before journalism disappears. And people often write to me, kids write to me, I've got a blog, I've got a podcast, I've got an online, blogs less now, but online presence. How do I get into newspapers? I go, why do you want to get into newspapers? I mean, newspaper writers are trying to develop online presences. The idea that you'd want to try, that isn't where the power is. I don't know if there's time to get young, different faces into newspapers before the last newspaper is sold and the presses are wound up.
Well, thank you for that.
Sorry, that's a bit depressing, but there you go.
I'd like to open us up to questions from the audience. Could you all keep your masks on, but
but they're all, I'm the only person at risk and him. I don't know, it seems awful. But I'm allowed to have my face off, so.
But you can take it off when you're making your question. But please stand up. So any questions from the audience?
So you have a kind of segment on the podcast called Desert Island Crisps. I was just wondering, what are your kind of desert island, it doesn't have to be 8, because I don't think we have time to go through 8, but what are your kind of top foods that would take on the desert island?
On a desert island? I don't know, my favourite food and my best recipe is probably baked potato. I think of all the things I ever want to eat, really, quite often when I'm in a restaurant and sit looking at the course 7 of a 12-course tasting menu where the chef has noticed that I was in and sent out a little turbot course, which I didn't ask and didn't want and don't like turbot and I'm stuffed, but he thinks that might be the thing that if I write about can change his life and feed his children. And I go, I wish I was at home eating a baked potato and hadn't come out at all. And a baked potato, which people often don't necessarily get right, but a baked potato in the hottest your oven can possibly go for about 20 minutes longer than you would really think it wants to be cooked for, till it starts to smell but papery and it goes papery on the edge and smells sort of charcoaly, and smashed with loads and loads of butter and salt, or a vegan spread of your choice. But butter is quite nice in those situations. And salt and pepper, and literally that, no egg, no baked beans, and not the kind of. Do they still have the vans here with the kebab vans? Do they still exist? And I would always have a kebab, and my girlfriend would always have the baked potato with baked beans. And they've been cooked they're all soft and watery and horrid. Not that, really dry baked potato with butter. That's basically it. Roast chicken every Friday night or Saturday night. Something I made it sound like a weird Jewish ritual, which it could be, but isn't in this particular case. Roast chicken with the kids. And all those simple food. I've been reviewing food for restaurants for 25 years, and with the exception of tonight, which I'm looking to for very much forward, I quite basically dread having to do anything new and exciting. But it's such a good job that I can't chuck it in. That's the one I should hand over to a young person.
I'd love to take it up.
But you're going to be too busy being president of the union next year and then going to work for Credit Suisse.
Are there any other questions?
That's cunning. So many people get masks to match their clothes, but he's bought a jumper to match his mask.
Some of my favourite columns of yours have been the ones like about London Fashion Week or about Poland, where you've expressed some extremely strong views in a very funny way. I was wondering if you had any, or not even sometimes, just quite strong views. And I was wondering if you'd had any serious fallout from any of those sorts of columns. And if so, if you'd recommend sticking to slightly more palatable topics.
Do I recommend to you to stick to more palatable topics, or that I should?
Well, I don't know. Let's say someone who's more junior or less established.
So I don't know. Complicated, that one as well. Good question. That Fashion Week one is
that was
one.
So good. It was so good.
Well, I think I have. It was one of those ones that the point I'm making is so good and I think I did once revisit it and try and write something a bit like it. Whenever it comes around, I want to do it. But the iniquities of the fashion industry, because I'm on the side there of. When I start my rant, I know that I'm on the side, basically, of exploited young women. I mean, it annoys me, the fashion industry. The kind of men... I mean, there's any number of things I could choose, but it's one where, unless I get it slightly wrong and I look like I'm being bullying towards young girls who end up in modelling, and I say something which is quite a fine line to tread, because what I'm trying to say is, what's a terrible exploitative thing, these ridiculous clothes, the way this ridiculous walk they're made to do, the whole thing of the idea that no one's going to buy the clothes anyway, this is just to sell the perfume. So you make the girl starve herself to wear the stupid dress, which looks crap anyway, just so that somebody buys the perfume, which is all they can afford from the duty-free shop, which shouldn't even be there, because people should just fly on the fucking aeroplane and not just be sold. Anyway, it's a whole sort of string of things that comes out. And there's something like that. I have good on my side, you know, I'm doing the right thing. But you can also... and being emphatic like that is great. And what I've always wanted to try and do is to write emphatically, but I'm not political, and I'm certainly not right-wing, and I certainly don't have a sort of baggage of bigotries that often come with those kinds of people, by whom I don't mean just Richard Littlejohn, I also mean Hitler, who was very persuasive and good at talking and extreme, but it's just the things he was trying to persuade people of were not good. But I always wanted to try and take literally the ascending tricolon as a rhetorical thing, take these things and use them to talk about lesser issues, quite often food, an issue like that. But I've got it wrong, and times change, and I did it with obesity. I made a film for Channel 4 called Tax the Fat, in which I advocated, I thought cleverly, I thought in a Swiftian way, I thought like a modest proposal. And it worked at the time on Channel 4 in 2007, where I said, you don't want to have a general fat tax because it's not fair on people who are normally shaped, who want to go out and buy a Mars bar. We shouldn't have to pay more. Individual overweight people, in fact, everyone, should have their tax liability multiplied by the square root of their body mass index over 100, which I thought indicated how bonkers it was, and I couldn't possibly mean it. But I appeared to be saying directly tax fat people to punish them for becoming fat, which was meant to be a satirical point. You couldn't possibly do that, and really it's about government, about legislation, and about companies. But 14 years go by, and you drag out that film and that line of thing, and I got in trouble for being like a fattist. You know, I was part of a fattist dialogue, which I had not set out to be even in 2007 when it wouldn't have mattered. By 2020, it's a bigotry which is part of a package with other things, and it's body shaming and it's bullying. And this was me just trying to be emphatic about something I thought a long time ago, and you find yourself having to defend yourself against it. And it's sort of I've now got involved with the youth obesity charity called Bite Back 2030, literally just like devote a part of my life to demonstrating that I didn't mean it. So that it can be quite dangerous taking the emphatic positions, but people love it. And also these days when I take an emphatic position, I get way more likes on, recommends on pieces, dialogue under my pieces, Twitter goes crazy. And then usually there's some people who don't like it, and I have a terrible weekend, and we go on country walks as a family, and I'm at the back tweeting on my phone, and my wife going, "Are you with us? Are you coming for the walk? Do you want to go?" And so she loves it when I write a piece. She calls it a talking dogs piece, which is where nothing happens, where I don't have any issues at all. There'll be a story in a paper, a nib that says, News in Brief, that says Camden Council was called to a council flat where 2 dogs were found living apparently on their own, perfectly happy. And then I write a piece from the point of view of one of the dogs, complaining about the waste deliveries, the dustbin timings, and I don't like the avocado toilet bowl. It's not very much fun for drinking out of. No one notices those pieces at all, and my wife loves them because we have a quiet life. And if I do one of those for about 3 weeks, I think, right, I've got to stir them up. I'm going to have my wife's going, no, I don't feel seen unless, and it's, yeah. But also, it's partly, my wife, again, who I keep citing, would say, the reason I do those pieces is because I'm not afraid of anything. And my therapist would say that's because my dad used to hit me, which is possibly true. So because I had a loving father, but he used to whack me a lot back when that was not okay, but still a bit more okay than it is now. I then went through a life where I'd go to school and the teacher would say, "Stop that, Coren, this instant." And I'm like, yeah, what? You're going to punch me like my dad? No, I don't think so. So what have you got? Detention? Fuck off. And that you end up in journalism not being afraid of anything, not being afraid of anyone really. I mean, I'd be afraid of some like 6 blokes with knives, but broadly being fearless. And then if you can then not worry too much about what people think about the thing that you write, there's a chance that your career could easily end. So being fearless at the start of a career can end in no career. But if you're still there 25 years later, then you've probably got a bit of, position. If that makes sense. Not that you opened a can of worms or anything.
Yeah, just here. Yeah. Just wait.
It's the incentive to ask a question is you get to have your mask off and be a bit less sort of sweaty, bogey face.
Thank you so much for coming today. So my question is, I love food, but I also love travel. Can you talk to us a little bit about your experiences and life beyond the lobby and all these wonderful things that we don't get to have while we're in Oxford?
Oh, well, no one can go anywhere. I feel now much fonder about life beyond the lobby. I look back like I was a madman. I used to not want to go. I used to argue. They'd say, look, we want you to go to French Polynesia and swim with the whales. And I go, oh no, another flight. And I want to just stay home with my, yes? Yeah. I do. I got quite lucky with that job, yeah. I don't know. Do you know, funnily enough, okay, it's interesting that you should say that because I started not wanting to go to do that hotel show because I'd been everywhere. But it was just, you go away for a week, you get back for a week, you go away for a week. I didn't want to not be with my kids. I would always, there's one of those Guardian Q&A things I remember reading about 10 years ago, and they'd have some big shot TV celeb. I particularly remember like Chris Evans and Chris Tarrant and people from the 90s, you know more about them. But they would say, what's your biggest regret? And it was always, I was so busy, I didn't see my children grow up. And I wasn't there for my children growing up. And when you've seen enough of those, you realise, wow, they really do regret it. And they have really ruined their lives by not being there for their families. And so I was sort of careful to not go away too much. But the truth was I'd never turned down anything really good to stay home with my family. And the amazing hotels was just too good not to do. But I did get into not wanting to go. And then COVID came along, and I just don't know what I was thinking. I haven't left the country for 2 years. And I can't believe the trips that I sort of didn't go on or series I didn't want to do. So then they're bringing it back, and they've just recommissioned it. And it's very funny to watch the BBC trying to plan a travel show. And only a week ago, they were going, well, we cancel this, but it's all fine. We're doing 2 in Portugal, so that'll be fine. And then the next day, no, Portugal. And the BBC's by the license fees just going to go up and up as they constantly moving our flights around, trying to get us to go somewhere. Because when they showed them all stripped, all 19 episodes through lockdown, it just sort of took off hugely with people who hadn't been that interested in it before, because travel, and there aren't any other travel shows of that kind. So people got hugely into it. But funnily enough, when they said, at the beginning of this, we might send you to, we'd be okay for amber countries. So you'd have to isolate on return. I said, no, definitely not. And they said, well, how would you feel if we got someone else to present it instead of you? I said, nope, I'll go to the amber countries. It's fine. Don't worry. So that would have been you. But it's, yeah. You're too young. You'd be spoiled. You have to have a very hard and difficult life like me for a bit first before you can be rewarded with a show like that, which they don't really make anymore.
Any other questions?
Yeah, thank you. So I just wanted to ask, when you started, you probably had like some inspirations, like also as a food critic, and do you still get inspirations from other sources, or do you read what other food critics write? And I mean, there is surely so much competition right now in this kind of journalism about food, and also you have so many influencers on social media that also talk about food. And how do you kind of still keep up with making yourself
Keep up with?
No, sorry.
No,
excel in.
Who do you read and like for sort of food critics?
Well, I don't really read food magazines or anything like that, but as you said before, I think you said you can't avoid TripAdvisor or something like that. Okay, yeah. That's really amateur writing, but still there are surely a lot of also I'm not British, but I know British TV shows such as what is it called? The something with baking, or yeah.
Wonderful. So that's why I wanted to come to Oxford, because you come to Oxford and people go, that show, something about baking. It's brilliant. That's a show. Yeah. Baking is a show. That show was a show which I used to present a show called Supersizers Go, which is before you're all born.
So there are so many yows like that, and it's surely hard to kind of compete. And also for instance, if some young people want to start up something like that, how would you suggest them to kind of?
I don't know. I can answer all those questions and can try. They're all excellent. How would young people start? It's the one thing I don't know and don't have to worry about. As I said, I'm still having dreams about the exams. The trauma for me in coming back to Oxford is being young is so scary and so terrible and so wonderful, and not knowing what you're going to end up is so terrifying, but also really exciting. And I've kind of ended up broadly okay. And if that bloke had known, he'd have been very disappointed that I wasn't, and this is an answer to your question, that I'm not a proper writer. All I ever wanted to be when I was here, when I remember conversations, I remember where I was standing, sort of outside the Eagle and Child, with a bloke called Chris Horn from Birkenhead, and he said, "What do you want to be?" And my father was a famous newspaper columnist, and my sister was a famous newspaper columnist. I said, "I don't care whatever I do, anything, as long as I'm not a newspaper columnist." And I've literally ended up the one thing that I didn't plan to do, because I wanted to be so. But I did sort of fail into it. So I wanted to be a writer, and because you asked about influences, so I was very into poetry. I wanted to be a poet, and I wrote poetry criticism. I wrote poems when I was here, and plays, and I published a novel. Don't go and read it. Not ideal. And I wanted to be that, and I tried really hard to be that. And all my writing influences are all great novelists and poets, and I've sort of read everything. They made me read everything here. And then I read it again later and understood it. And therefore, it's a bit it's a little bit like sprinters are trained to, they used to train them by putting them in big boots, steel toe-cap boots, and run in the sand. And then when they take the boots off and put them on a running track, they go really fast. And I tried really hard to be a really good poet and novelist and didn't really succeed. But I'm a very good restaurant critic. I stood down about 3 divisions and was better at writing and able to do it. So the restaurant writers that I admire are mostly dead. And I wouldn't have said I admired them when they were alive. But A. Gill was a famous restaurant critic who wrote about other things and around and other subjects like that. And there was a guy, I don't know, the other writers I don't think of as doing the same job as me, because they are mostly describing platefuls of food, telling you whether it's good value, suggesting perhaps you'd like a side of broccoli, which is not sort of my thing. And I think I stand slightly apart from them. And people either come to me and like the thing that I do or don't. I have no idea how a young person, would get to hear from there. There are people, I have a friend, there's a guy called Clerkenwell Boy on Instagram who's got 270,000 followers on Instagram, takes these beautiful photos of food. I'm sure he's more influential than I am at putting, well, no, he's probably not, but in certain areas, putting bums on seats in restaurants. You want him to come along. But I would never aim as low to young people at a great university, or really any university. I would never aim as low as being a food writer. You'd aim to be something at this stage, much, much higher. Maybe get that, and as you gradually trickle down, and your expectations and your are fail, and your dreams are shattered, and reality bites, you might end up being a restaurant critic at the end of it.
Okay, thank you. So,
you're welcome. I'm sorry. You've still got the mic. You can ask another one. They're not going to take it.
So you said that you don't like write kind of description of how the food tastes or something.
Well, no, I do. I do.
But right? Yeah.
I do, but it's not I don't think of it as the most interesting thing. I don't think that a meal which 99% of your readers aren't going to ever eat should be right at the top of the piece. You should be telling them stuff that they don't know, taking them on a story, taking them on a journey, like I would have tried to do if I was a proper writer. But nobody wanted to read my stories past about the 8th paragraph. So now I do 8 paragraphs and put some food on the end.
Okay.
And they're delighted. And and I put, the chicken was salty, the loots were clean, 7 out of 10.
I wanted to ask, do you also write in other languages or
write in other languages?
Yeah.
Oui, bien sûr.
Ah, bien sûr.
Oui, j'écris en français. Do you know, it's funny that that's a hell of a question. I don't write in other, Beckett used to write in French and then translate it back to get purer prose, didn't he? Funnily enough, what day is it today? Monday. If you go online, you get one free piece, then you have to pay for it, but you can get one down. On Wednesday, my restaurant review in the Times is in French. Partly. It's in franglais. It's a piece, I've written a review of a restaurant called Bar des Prés in Mayfair, where the chef is a Parisian guy who they call the French Jamie Oliver, le Jamie Oliver français. And I've written this thing about, it begins like, what's the French for lovely jubbly? And then I've written about, le biche boche. And this kind of, and it's the first time that I've ever written a piece that wasn't entirely in English. I did French and German A level, and theory I could in French and German, but I don't think the French want to hear what a roast beef like me thinks about
because
that
I
food.
feel like often there are words in other languages that just don't exist in English, and like to describe, for instance, like food. And I know that Chinese has umami is taken from Japanese,
and
so
there is no umami and we steal it.
Like,
that's what England does. It steals nice things from other countries and puts them in its language. But you're right. That would be an example. That's just such a fantastically esoteric question. I really feel like every restaurant I go to, I should write in the language of the cuisine that I'm eating. Because it is difficult. It is difficult, and particularly writing about the further away you get from Europe, writing about Chinese, Japanese, African, the way you write about it, you can, if you're too enthusiastic, you can be accused of, white man explorer complex. That's the kind of a thing. Like, I've just discovered this thing called ramen noodles, which nobody knew about. You go, no, and even as you try and negotiate your way around that, you can get into, you can get into pickles. And there's no question that it would be better, such a piece would be better written in Japanese, but.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Giles. Thank you very much to our audience. Please remain in your seats and Adam will let you out. Thank you.